Welcome back to the Long War of the Chosen, patch 1.2 class guides. Today we're gonna look at the gunner, and big disclaimer up ahead. In my initial introduction video to the class guides, I said that I value experience over pure theory crafting, and that I kind of want to talk about stuff that I actually played with. We're coming now into the classes where I have not actually played with all the different possible specs for one reason or another. So just putting that out there, that some of the information in this class guide is based on my understanding of mechanics and my reading of perks and tooltips, and maybe watching other people play with this, but where I don't have personal play experience with that. Specifically when we're talking about the suppression gunner. So for the gunner class, I see two different ways to spec them, with, of course, you know, some leeway here. And also, to be said, you know, when we're talking about gunner, a class that wants to be shooting, they probably don't want to be an officer because they don't have the actions to use for officer abilities. Talking first about the direct fire gunner. So for me, this is basically the main shredder bringer of your squad. The soldier who will shred the armor of enemies and also bring a lot of damage to those targets. So as the core perks here, I would identify obviously Shredder, and then both rapid fire and cyclic fire for their respective multi-shot attacks, depending on whether or not you have to move or don't have to move, and of course whether or not it's available as a cooldown. Now, I think one maybe controversial thing here might be completely ignoring Hail of Bullets, not even as an optional pick. For me, it's just Shredder is just like the main function that my gunners bring to the table. And while Hail of Bullets seems strong, as in it's a guaranteed hit with a higher damage weapon, so isn't there value in this? Isn't it? Can't you just bring Shredder ammo instead of picking the Shredder perk? Then you're only shredding 2 instead of 3. That's only one difference. Yeah, it's 3 difference when you shred with cyclic fire, you know. And if you have a sectopod late game or a gatekeeper with like 8 armor, then it's a question of completely shredding them with 1 cyclic fire or leaving armor left there for your rest of the squad to deal with, and then basically reducing all the damage by 2 points or 3 points or however many points of armor that you couldn't shred. So for me, Shredder is a core perk here, and I don't see really room for Hail of Bullets. Of course, you know, your personal preferences might vary here, but you know, I'm drawing a line here, and even though there's a lot of rows where I didn't have a core perk, we're also going to talk about like what my preferred picks is, and I want to say for gunners, I probably very rarely change from those from my main build. Alright, but let's look at the rows that we haven't talked about yet. And there's I put a lot of blue boxes here, but you know, within reason, I'd say. So talking about Lance Corporal, my preferred pick here is always Center Mass. It's more damage. You know, we've talked on our class guides about how increasing your base damage, your minimum damage helps you to secure kills, especially on early game enemies. Cannon does 4 to 6 damage. Center Mass turns it to 5 to 7. So not only if you hit, you're guaranteeing kills on all these 5 HP enemies like sentries, but you also put 7 HP enemies suddenly in one-shot range, where they previously weren't unless you crit. Additionally, since you get all the nice multi-shot perks later on, like Cyclic Fire, like Rapid Fire, and also AoE attacks like Saturation Fire, the extra damage from Center Mass just multiplies, right? You just get more value out of it. Now, in the Shinobi guide, we talked well, I talked at length about how good Combatis is and shutting down certain enemies. Your mutants, your Andromedons, your berserkers, all that kind of stuff. So having it on another class seems strong on paper. That being said, usually, in my experience, my gunners are never in a position, or very rarely in a position, where I could move them next to any of these enemies to control them. Not only that, I probably want to do something more productive with my gunner, rather than dashing them next to a mutant to shut the mutant down, when the gunner's job is probably rather to cyclic fire that berserker that came with the mutant or something like that. So again, it might be a playstyle preference. I never found myself in a situation where I said, oh, I wish my gunner had Combatis right about now. And finally, grazing fire. I mentioned this in the discussion about the ranger and how it helps keeping your rapid reaction chain going. Now, the only interaction where this might be relevant is for chain shot, where you get a higher chance. If the first attack misses, you get a grace roll, and then if it still hits, then you get your second shot. But I think it's more of a kind of saving thing here, where you get at least a little bit of damage in, and even a grazed attack will shred your target. That being said, I feel like, especially later on, when you have your best possible scope on your gunner, and you probably they also are a very high candidate for perception PCS. Like, you want their shots to land. You want them to get close to 100% hit chance as possible, and help them reach that. And also the targets late game that they want to be shredding. Talking about your sector bots, gatekeepers to a lesser extent, your hive queen, like outside of the gatekeeper, right? The other big health enemies don't really have that much defense. So you're probably looking at 100% to hit with the right gear and maybe the right support from your squad. So, as you get closer to very high aim, the value of grazing fire rapidly diminishes. Alright, second row is a little bit of a weird row, I would say, because nothing really that helps the primary role, as in high damage and shredding, is in here. So let's talk about the free perks here. So Formidable is your run-of-the-mill survival perk. You get a little bit extra hit points, you take less damage from explosives, keeps you out of sickbay for a while longer. Used to be my first pick, not anymore. The first pick kind of has been replaced by Flush for me, because well, it's you can increase your chance to hit. Sure, you do 50% reduced damage, but maybe to finish off that enemy that's on low health and cover, it might be more viable than picking up Hail of Bullets to achieve the same goal. You also now, with Flush, debuff the enemies, reducing their defense, reducing their dodge, making them easier to hit for everybody else in your squad. And most importantly, and that's an interaction that I often forgot about, but that's kind of important to know, if you flush a target, or rather, if you flush a chosen, the forced move from flush replaces that chosen reaction. So they will not get to do any of their reaction stuff if you fire at them with flush. So that can be especially useful against the assassin. Let's say the assassin, moved next to one of your other soldiers on a previous reaction. You can still get some damage in with a flush attack. Force her to move. She doesn't get her standard reaction and won't attack your soldier. And who knows, maybe she even ends up not next to one of your soldiers, which would be probably helpful. So flush, definitely a good choice. If you find yourself very often using suppression, even on a direct fire gunner, then, there's nothing wrong with picking up extra 20% hit chance. For me, suppression is a tool I don't like to use all that often, because I think the enemies often ignore it, or the debuff isn't strong enough. It doesn't really. Basically, if I wanna reduce an enemy's aim, I'd rather throw a flashbang at them. Sure, the flashbang actually has less aim penalty, but it also shuts off secondary abilities, and a lot of those are not disabled by suppression. But yeah, like I'm not a suppression enjoyer, so take that with a grain of salt. My experience with suppression are limited. I'd rather shut down enemies or kill them rather than suppress them and hope that they move and then I get a free shot. So that's my 2 cents here. Alright, we talked about Shredder. Let's go to Staff Sergeant. Chain Shot versus Demolition. And Chain Shot is a bit of a weird ability. I often get comments like, why do you take Chain Shot? Rapid Fire is just outright better 99% of the time. And it is. It is, absolutely. Basically, once you get to Gunnery Sergeant and pick up Rapid Fire, you don't press that Chain Shot button all that often. It only has -10 as opposed to -15, but if you miss your first shot, you lose the second. So depending on how much damage you need, like Rapid Fire will be mathematically just a better choice a lot of the time. My main reason for Chain Shot is usually the time in the campaign when this ability becomes available. So basically, once you get your Staff Sergeants, you're kind of in the early mid-game, and you might see some bigger enemies show up, as in Berserkers, and also the first heavy mechs, the red mechs. And Chain Shot is basically my tool to deal with these kind of enemies. And again, you need the flexibility of moving and shooting in some cases. Like, once you have Cyclic Fire, yeah, as long as you're in line of sight of that heavy mech or of that Berserker, you can just Cyclic Fire them. But if you have to move and then shoot, only having a single shot available kind of makes Chain Shot kind of almost a requirement, I would say. So that's why it's my first pick. That being said, if you like cover destruction, and why wouldn't you like cover destruction? Demolition is actually not terrible. So if you really need to destroy some cover for some enemies in order to hit them with somebody else, then maybe picking up Demolition is a choice. Maybe also on, like, let's say, later gunners. You're past that hurdle of the of these early heavy enemies, and maybe you have somebody else in the squad who can pick up the slack there. Maybe you a gunner that levels up a little bit later, and there's a ranger in the team who has Rapid Fire already, so they can take care of these high health enemies like Berserkers. So your new gunner picks up Demolition to just help the team a little bit more, and the team doesn't rely on them having Chain Shot. And you can just afford to wait until that new gunner reaches Gunnery Sergeant. I did not put a box here on Danger Zone. You could say, okay, if you pick up Lockdown, and this is kind of a open choice, why not pick up a little bit more suppression over here? Maybe. As we're moving on, maybe one word here on Rupture. I don't like it on the gunner. I think you kind of need Rapid Fire. You need some multi-shot tools in situations where you can't Cyclic Fire, especially also keep in mind that this has now a 3-turn cooldown. Back in Long War 2 it only had a 2-turn cooldown, so you could use it every other turn. So now there are bigger gaps where you can't Cyclic. You need some sort of multi-shot perk, right? And Rapid Fire is your choice there. That being said, like, ideally, on paper, a gunner is a good soldier to have Rupture on. Because they're usually the first ones to attack the target, because they are shredding it. So if they can also rupture it for 3 additional damage, that seems not terrible. But it's really just you need your full action for this, right? Now maybe there's a situation if you pick Traverse Fire in your Master Sergeant row, and so you can basically shoot at an enemy once and then with a second shot rupture them. That might be a situation where rupture becomes viable. It's like kind of ghetto rapid fire, but is it going to be really that helpful as opposed to shoot at them once with Traverse Fire and then rapid fire them? Is the +3 damage on all future attacks going to make up for missing out on a full second attack from rapid fire? That's basically the question, and that's got to be, it's got to be a really high health target for that to pay off, and that's why I think it's too situational for me to actually consider rupture. Anyway, the other reason why I don't see the Rupture Traverse Fire combo is, even though Traverse Fire does have a little blue box here, I think one of the other two is usually my primary choice. Saturation Fire is probably one of the best openers on new groups from Concealment that's in the game right now. It's high damage, big AoE, easy to target, long range, good accuracy. So in terms of concealment ambush, it basically ticks all the boxes. Now, you will not necessarily fully wipe out a group unless you roll Bring 'em On in your XCOM row, but it will get really close. Like, there's a nice, you could just Saturation Fire a big group of the typical Advent Rainbow pod of 8 enemies. You can usually easily hit all 8 of them, kill maybe 1 or 2, have everybody else low, and then your Shinobi Reaper comes in and finishes off the rest. So you just 2-manned a group of 8 enemies. And then in rare situations, you can also, with the right positioning, use this outside of concealment. It's great against groups of melee enemies, like if it's lost, or even if it's a bunch of chrysalids that activate it. Like these usually often clump up. So it's a great AoE attack. Then we have Combat Fitness, which is like, if you have enough other ambush options, let's say you have an amazing trench gun or street sweeper assault that you usually open up with in that squad, or you just super into your technicals, flamethrower openings that you say, you know, I rarely get to use Saturation Fire with the gunner anyway, I might as well pick up some extra stats. Extra aim is always nice, extra mobility is especially nice if you roll a minimum mobility roll like this. So it's a nice little bit extra. And then the third choice here, Traverse Fire. Traverse Fire has some uses where it kind of makes, you could even argue that you don't need Cyclic Fire if you have Traverse Rapid, right? Because Traverse Rapid is a combo you can use every turn. You shoot once with Traverse, follow up with 2 shots with Rapid Fire. So making you not need Cyclic Fire, which, yeah. First of all, you gotta wait a little bit longer. You gotta wait on Master Sergeant until you have that. But the bigger issue is, I don't see the big appeal of Iron Curtain and or Cool Under Pressure, unless you have like a certain XCOM row perks that might lean you towards, say, you know, I think you can get rapid reaction. I think we had a rapid reaction gunner, and then you're like, okay, then in that case, I really want Cool Under Pressure to get a little bit of an Overwatch gunner going, and then you make up for it with Traverse Rapid. But that's all, you know. I think these kind of niche specs that come from certain XCOM row perks are not worth like making its own spec for. But yeah, in general, Traverse Fire is an option, but I think if you have both of these perks, then it kind of is a little bit redundant, and I think you get more value out of Combat Fitness or Saturation Fire. Alright, and let's look into the Suppression Gunner. Alright, so let's talk about the suppression gunner. And again, the what I said at the start applies here. I've not played with a suppression gunner in my squad in a very, 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 very long time, if ever. This is based on my understanding of how suppression works and what your best bonuses of it. Now, the biggest change with the class rework in patch 1.2 is that previously Cool Under Pressure and Danger Zone were in the same row. I don't remember if it was here or there, doesn't matter, but now you can get both of these perks. So you can get the radius of your area suppression increased, and you can get the additional aim on your suppression and the chance for your suppression shots to critically hit. So this makes suppression a little bit stronger, absolutely, or rather, a fair bit stronger. So, the other base perks here, core perks, is of course previously mentioned lockdown, 20% hit chance against enemies who attempt to move when you're suppressing them, and then 25% bonus damage on enemies. So on your reaction shots based on that are coming out of suppression. So that can be a surprising amount of damage. You know, it's a percentage. So the bonus damage goes up with your weapon tiers, right? At the start it's going to be 1 extra point of damage on your 4 to 6 weapon, but at the end on your plasma cannon it's going to be more than 1 point of damage. I don't have the stats in the back of my head, but yeah, that's definitely a significant bonus. Keep in mind though that especially in the late game, with more enemies getting shadow step and or lightning reflexes, or like these abilities being more common in enemies, the value or the suppression shots you actually get off might fall off a little bit. So yeah, I think these are basically your core suppression perks. And between lockdown and cool under pressure, you get 30 aim on your suppression shots. Keep in mind, this is already factoring in the reaction shot penalty. Your hit chance gets multiplied by 0.7 on Overwatch or reaction shots. This you get the full 30 here. Right? Let's say for ease of my own math, let's say you have 100 base aim on an Overwatch shots. Your shot percentage will be 70%, and then 30% from lockdown and cool under pressure will get added onto it. And when I'm saying Overwatch, I mean, of course, the suppression shot. So, yeah, a lot of extra aim, making it actually kind of reliable if that enemy can be fired upon, shadow step, lightning reflexes, and if they actually move. Keep in mind, an enemy you're suppressing has to move for you actually to trigger your suppression shot. If they just stand still in Overwatch, you gain nothing. If they shoot back at you, you also, do not get an attack on them. So in terms of general combat tactics, what you might want to do, if you can, is if you suppress a large number of enemies, have somebody else flank those enemies, which will cause the AI to more reliably start moving out of the flank, and this way your suppression actually triggers and shoots at them with that nice extra damage and that nice extra damage and the nice extra hit chance. Anyway, in terms of secondary perks, a lot of stuff that we previously talked about applies here. Extra damage is nice, combative, situational, grazing fire. If you kind of just want to make sure you tag at least all of those enemies that you're suppressing, getting some extra chance to hit here. Although I still think, even for the suppression build, I still think the extra damage is going to be the biggest benefit. Also with keeping in mind that the value of grazing fire goes down as your aim increases, and with 30 extra aim just from your perks alone, I think the chance to miss might be low enough that grazing attacks doesn't pay off. Then again, the previously mentioned Shadow Step and Lightning Reflex guys hey, suddenly you have a 50% chance to at least graze them, right? And if you're using ammo that, like dragon rounds or poison rounds that apply debuffs to the enemies, that might be a way to get these debuffs onto more enemies. Alright, back here. You know, I do like Killzone. I have fond memories of Killzone being awesome. And if you already picking up cool under pressure, then might as well pick up Killzone, but on the other hand, you're still the gunner with the big gun, and you might be needed sometimes to not suppress, but just help to get that high health target down. And if you don't have any multi-shot perks, you're gonna hurt. So I think a rapid fire is probably the primary choice here. But you know, a nice Killzone is nice. And then in the final row, everything as I said previously probably also applied here. Same kind of skill choices. I think there's a higher preference here for Traverse Fire, since of course as a suppressor you will not have cyclic, so Traverse Rapid becomes really good. If you're suppressing a lot, then maybe you won't you get use of Traverse Fire a lot, although you can always, you know, shoot and then suppress. But maybe you're just interested in getting that little bit extra aim, a little bit extra mobility here from combat fitness. I do think, though, that Saturation Fire drops a little bit for the Suppression Gunner in terms of priority. Most importantly, without Shredder, you're not shredding the enemies in the AoE, so any follow-up is a little bit harder. But yeah, I think those are basically the main perks for the Suppression Gunner. And yeah, let's head over to the wiki, look at the XCOM row perks, and see what kind of changes, and is there really something like a knife gunner build? Spoiler alert, there's not. Alright, a whole bunch of XCOM row perks. Before we jump into it, I just realized, looking through the list again, as I done even before recording, but only now the realization hit me. When we were talking about Saturation Fire a couple minutes ago, I said, you know, to get really good damage out of it, you want to see if you can pick up Bring 'em On. Well, you're going to be looking for it for a really long time, because this is no longer in the XCOM deck for the Gunner, which I've been looking over this now 15 times. Did that really get removed? What a disaster. So yeah, now Saturation Fire, Bring 'em On for those glorious pot vibes is just no longer a thing. Anyway, let's start off by anything that might really influence your perk choices. And I think the biggest example here is Rapid Reaction. Or rather, any sort of Overwatch points. If you have perks, Rapid Reaction, something like Ready for Anything, and then maybe in addition to any of that, maybe something like Covering Fire. So this might steer you a little bit into an Overwatch build or side build, either because you're speccing a suppression gunner anyway and you have cool under pressure, or maybe then the consideration of only picking up cool under pressure for good Overwatch shots, because hey, you can get 3 of those. And this might then also say, okay, in that case I want to have Grazing Fire to not get my rapid reaction chains interrupted. You do have one of the stronger weapons in the game as a gunner. So anything I talked about with the Overwatch Ranger, you know, how good rapid reaction can be, basically then also applies to your gunner. Although keep in mind, you know, if you really want to look at something like Ready for Anything, rapid reaction, that's a lot of AP to spend, right? I think this is hard to justify 65 AP, because the max you can probably get is, what is it, 56 with very high combat intelligence. So that's a bit of a big investment. Now, on its own, if you don't have rapid reaction and just see ready for anything, I don't think that's a really good pick. I would actually say it's a terrible pick, because the important part here of the description is after firing a turn-ending standard shot. Well, any sort of shooting gunner is probably either rapid firing or a cyclic firing every turn. So you kind of very rarely take standard shots anymore. So I would be a little bit hesitant to, if I see ready for anything, I'm not gonna, you know, throw everything in the wind, pick up cool under pressure and say, yeah, I'm gonna be overwatching now, because you only get these 3 overwatches with standard shots. So keep that in mind if you wanna pick that up. The other big perk that might influence your perk choices in the main tree is, of course, my favorite Shadow Strike. As much as I was ranting on it on the Shinobi how useless it is, on a gunner, this combined with Saturation Fire is glorious, and if you haven't played with that yet, do it. 50 bonus aim and crit when concealed. It's basically, it turns Saturation Fire. Well, Saturation Fire might already be the best opener in the game, but it's even betterer with you know, with Shadow Strike on top of it. It used to be even better with Shadow Strike and Bring 'em On, but that doesn't, you know, somebody doesn't like fun. So yeah, anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Then we briefly touched on, you see a bunch of blade related perks. You know, you got your Blade Master, you got potential Reaper, Lightning Slash, Flash, Whirlwind for repositioning, Blade Storm. So don't get me wrong, the combat knife, especially the tier 2 and very especially the tier 3 versions of the knife, are really strong weapons for considering the cost. It's more a thing, or are you really gonna be, is that what you're gonna be spending your turn on stabbing somebody when you could be cyclic firing a highly important target? If you roll the perfect combination of melee perks, then maybe, you know, just for the memes, just for the dreams, you want to build something like that. You know, just looking at it now, the idea of having a gunner whip out his knife and Reaper chain through, you know, 6 enemies is a fantastic picture, and I want to see that happening. But you really need to roll the golden combo here, like something like Reaper Flash, Whirlwind. And even then, it's kind of sad that, of course, you know, you can only roll 1 perk from each row. So you're not gonna have Blade Master in that case. Then again, Reaper is pointless without any sort of repositioning tools. Either Reaper Whirlwind or Reaper Implacable. That would probably have to be. I'm still thinking that you're better off just focusing on your weapon attacks, spreading and doing a lot of damage to enemies. Alright, let's highlight some individual perks that might be solid choices, right? Paramedic, we talked about before, can be used as a repositioning tool, you know, where you dash, double move for a single action and then you can still attack. So you can dash into a new position and then still rapid fire. So definitely some value here. Although keep in mind, you probably don't have an equipment slot for medkit on your gunner, so you will get to use that actually 1 time only, because you know, you get a free medkit with 1 use from the perk. Lone Wolf can help you. I think for the gunner it's a little bit harder, since they're usually roughly in the middle of the squad. Actually getting the Lone Wolf bonus is probably a little bit harder to achieve. So if you pick it up because you want to make up for maybe having some slightly lower aim, keep that in mind, that you then have to actively prepare your positions to actually get the bonus for Lone Wolf. Sometimes like to put a little post-it note, you know, on my screen if I'm out in a squad where it's like your gunner has lone wolf here, just so to keep it in mind. Reposition, good mobility perk here, or reposition. Dedication, same thing. Dedication is something, if you really like combatives on your gunner and you might be running them in there to combatives tank enemies, then having the ability to ignore reaction fire so that you can actually run in there without somebody blade storming or CCSing you might not be a bad choice. What else? Steady hands. You will hopefully be standing still a lot with your gunner, as you know, you need to be standing still for cyclic fire to work. So can be useful, but it's not as good as on a sharpshooter. Not a terrible pickup, but yeah, not bad. Aggression is like your ghetto shadow strike for saturation fire openers. You get the crit chance, you don't get the hit, you hopefully don't need the hit because you have amazing aim and all the best gear and PCS and scopes. But hey, this way you can get some extra crit on that. Untouchable is always nice to have. Resilience might even help you free up an inventory slot, so you don't need to have a vest for your crit resistance. So that's resilience can be a flat +1 mobility as you open up an equipment slot. At least for the way I equip my people. Right? I often go for the crit resistance vests, and then if I have resilience, I kind of don't need them anymore that desperately. Locked on can be nice because it will be triggered by your first shot on multi-shot attacks, right? On your cyclic fire and rapid fire. So after the first shot, you get the bonus of locked on for successive shots. So that's kind of really nice to have. Apex Predator. There's nothing describes the feeling of having Apex Predator on your soldier and then never getting the panic to trigger on enemies. There's always a lot of fun frustration to be had. So it sounds really nice that you have a chance to panic enemies. I just wish it wasn't so random. Okay, Serial in the tier 4 is probably not a great pick because you're not always going to be in a position where you can take multiple kill shots. You can maybe alleviate that a little bit if you actually give your gunner a grappling suit, or if you have the Archon suit so they can launch somewhere else and then shoot a bunch of guys. But it's kind of a niche use, I want to say. Hit and run can be useful, but also keep in mind that you get a single action back, so if you want to cyclic fire somebody, you will get a cyclic fire. You're not going to be able to trigger hit and run in the same turn. And yeah, I mean, even something like Death from Above, that's potentially an extra shot each time you're shooting, as long as you get a kill from a high ground position. So that can be fairly strong on a gunner. You're not always going to be able, though, to utilize the high ground, because ideally you want to stand still and cyclic fire. You don't want to move up on the high ground and then only rapid fire. Hunter's Instincts, we talked about in Shinobi that it's kind of really strong with the +2 damage. That being said, I don't think your gunner is always going to be in a position where they can actually flank enemies and trigger the bonus damage effect, so maybe not worth the 35 points. You're also going to be shooting a lot at mechanical enemies, because of the whole shredder and because they are high threat, high value targets that require the multi-shots of the gunner, and yeah, none of these are flankable then, so Hunter's Instinct's not going to trigger, so probably not worth the 35 points in my opinion. At the end of the day, it's to me, it always seems really hard to make these kind of suggestions for your XCOM role, because it's going to be random which perks you have available, right? And that's you see the list of perks, and then you gotta see how many AP you have based on your combat intelligence and what you want to invest in. It's not like that you can pick and choose your perks. That would be a fantasy dream world, but we're not living in that. Anyway, on that note, that's the gunner. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.